Here's my next question. Is Satan real?
Of course he's real.
What kind of real?
Just because he's in your head doesn't mean he isn't real.
Basically. I mean, Satan certainly exists as a concept and certainly has influence on our world. I think the question of whether Satan actually exists is not a very interesting one.
Oh my God. Did you just say I asked an uninteresting question?
I mean, doesn't it matter who you ask? I mean, depending on who you ask, Satan is more real or not.
Do you believe in angels?
It's a Mesopotamian. It got into Judaism from Mesopotamia, so
I think they ask Americans. I think like 85% of Americans believe in angels.
How divine.
How divine. I mean, it's fascinating to learn, but I wasn't actually asking the personal question. I was asking for Milton. I want to know what is the stat. Maybe it is a personal question, but for Milton, does Satan exist?
I think so.
I mean, the obvious answer is duh. He's in the whole poem, right?
At the very least, he's a concept real enough to write about.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Estelle, what did you say?
No, but then I want to ask then again, in what sense do you mean exist? Because clearly exists if he's writing about in his poem, but does Milton necessarily believe in him? Is a different question.
He seems to suggest he exists in many different ways, right? Like all these lenses, all these forms.
Right.
That's kind of the point, is he's so multiplicitous. Or
I guess another way of asking the question is evil real or not? I know I'm asking questions that philosophers would take me out and lynch me for, but you're a literary critics. Is evil real?
It has to be real, because if we wouldn't know what evil is, we wouldn't know what good is.
It's kind of like the tiger poem.
That's the Areopagitica argument.
What's the tiger poem? Tiger, tiger, burning bright?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That the tiger, that God is also good and evil.
Right. Well,
right. But is there actual bad, or is there just our not understanding what is going on?
We do know, right, that, and we mentioned this. Maybe we didn't talk about it together recently. The problem with theodicy, justifying the ways of God to men, is of course having to deal with evil or suffering. And one of the ways that some of the early church fathers dealt with it was by saying, not the church fathers, but people who were rejected, they said there are two forces in the world. Meaning, if we don't want to give God responsibility for evil because he's all good. So we will create, in order to solve that problem, we'll create, another force that is responsible for evil. But the problem that you run into is that you have solved the problem of God's goodness, but you've now compromised God's all-powerfulness.
Sovereignty,
right?
Yeah.
Right. So you gain something, but you lose something else. So that's the problem. That's kind of behind my question of evil. Is it real? Is evil real? And
that's why you need to emphasize Satan's agency, because if he lacks agency, then you impute the evil to God.
Right. Remember that God says, you think you're going to bring evil out of my good, but all the evil is just going to go on your head 3 times over, right? Milton's playing fast and loose there because he wants to give Satan complete agency, so evil is not the responsibility of the divine. But it's kind of like he's flirting with the Manichaean there in a way. Because in Paradise Law, you know what I mean by saying that he's flirting with the Manichaean? He's like flirting with the idea that there is an independent force of evil in the world.
Well, there is. It's us.
That
might be the end of the Devar Torah, but the Devar Torah goes on for 647 hours before we get there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I took the easy bit of doing a machshavet unit in high school.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Yes, Alana.
Isn't it possible that that it connects to his idea of free will? I mean, that's the whole poem. We found it in different places and in other writings of his that he's talking about free will. Do we have free will to make decisions even if everything is planned out ahead of time?
Right. So a good question would be is why aren't we just like Satan? Why aren't we just like characters? Why aren't we just like characters in a story in which our roles have already been determined for us?
How do you know we're not?
Cue Twilight Zone music. Do you know that? No? You do.
Rod Sterling.
But some of us are evil, and some of us can't repent.
That's a different question.
Ilana's never too late. I'm just kidding. No, but that's part of the question. Yeah.
We are much more like Satan because we live in real world of suffering.
Right. So I think to the extent that it goes back to the question of theodicy, to the extent that Milton is writing a genuine theodicy, then evil is real and therefore Satan is real. But I think on some level, and I've been thinking about Milton for years and years and years, just like the metaphors that Milton uses are incommensurable or incommensurate with what they are representing, meaning they always fall short. You're with me so far? Just like the metaphors that Milton uses are always falling short of what they want to represent. So when I see the leaves on the Italian landscape, I see Satan. I do, but I know in some sense I'm not really seeing him. Just as on the micro level, that's true. Ready for this? All of Paradise Lost, poetry as commentary, is proclaiming its own falling short in relationship to what it wants to represent. And wait. And even the story that Milton is telling, or maybe especially the story that Milton is telling, even though he himself is giving it this status in which he's almost like a prophet, itself is merely commentary on the divine. And when I say, you're with me, so this is like very hard for 7 o'clock at night.
Yeah, you said it in the video, but can you just elaborate more?
But the merely is the merely of Hilary Putnam's enough may not be everything, but enough is enough. That's all there is.
That I didn't get.
Poetry is commentary. Milton's poetry is commentary on the divine. And you don't get the part enough. A metaphor, the metaphor is never everything, but it's maybe enough.
But the metaphor is okay. I'm going to have to ask you about this later because
you can ask me. You can ask me about it now.
But the metaphor is kind of everything because metaphors do what logical arguments can't. They can hold the complexity of life in a way that that logic cannot.
Metaphors are made up of similarity and difference.
Right.
Right? And it's the knowledge of the difference which makes, as I said this also, which makes poetry superior. Why should it be superior to other disciplines if it acknowledges its own insufficiency? Meaning, let's be like scientists where we say with certainty, we know what we know. But scientists are limited in what they can know. They do know what they know, but they cannot provide the commentary on the divine that poets do. And anyone who comes along with a commentary on the divine and says, I'll tell you what it is, this is the definitive interpretation once and for all, is writing what we call bad theodicy. A theodicy that is aspiring to the perspective of the divine when we're only human. And metaphors are the means through which humans can express what they can.